Hello! Welcome to another episode of Pixelvalve. Today's episode I'm going to be talking about camera lenses again, so if you're not interested in camera lenses, skip the video. Following on from the last episode where we looked at the Helios and the Pancolar lenses, I told you that the Helios and the Pancolar was ready. I was just waiting for a final production part to arrive for the Pancolar, and here it is. So previously, in the last episode, I was using a mock-up, a prototype, something that I had developed from a reject part for a different lens. But here we have a fully produced 3D printed multi-jet fusion version of the actual computer aided design for that part. Now, in manufacturing we call this part here a first off. A first off is something that all manufacturers do with each batch of products. So whenever something is made and sent to the manufacturing line, sent to production, the first thing that comes off the production line, the first one, is used as an inspection. So it's used for inspection and analysis. We look at the part, we check it for dimensional accuracy, we check the measurements, we examine it carefully for any blemishes, problems, or anything really that can cost us money. Because if you're going to produce a batch of, say, 1,000 parts and the first one is wrong, then that means you've wasted money on 1,000 parts. But if you can catch it at the first one, it means that you've just lost the first off. Adjustments can be made and changes can be made before the batch runs. So in this case, examining the first off, I discovered a lot of problems. Not a hell of a lot really, just a few. So the first thing I noticed was that the back is slightly off center. Can you see the lens, how it sits inside that adapter? It looks slightly wider on one side than the other. Now it's possible that it could be because of this area here being raised and this lower, but I think there is actually a slight off-center. Now this is easily corrected by shifting the whole lens just a little bit to one of the edges, probably that way. But the bayonet is also just a little bit tight, and the rim is just slightly, very slightly large. So I'm going to address these three things before running a batch of these. So the first off is something that's extremely important in manufacturing. It's something that's always been used, and it's a standard sort of procedure, if you like. Now when you're producing something, whether it's in your own shed, whether it's in college or in a small factory or in a large factory, the same procedure should still work exactly the same. Now, I was also looking at the Helios 44-2, and we'd gone through that process with the Helios 44-2. I'd adjusted it and iterated the design and improved it into something that was working. So then I ordered another one for my other Helios, and I found that with my new Helios, or well, with my other Helios lens, because I've got 3 Helios lenses, what I found was that this Helios lens isn't quite the same as this Helios lens. Even though they came from the same manufacturer, they were produced in roughly the same era. You know, this one is 1974 and this one is 1973. So roughly around the same time. But this Helios lens was slightly different, which brought my attention to something quite important, quite serious. Now, in the 1960s, the 1950s and the 1970s, manufacturing techniques probably weren't as accurate as the techniques that we have today. For example, the camera that you're viewing this on right now is a Nikon DSLR from fairly recent times. So the tolerances, the manufacturing tolerances within that camera would be very accurate compared to something that was made in the 1970s, for example. Now, the thing with these tolerances is that not only are we addressing tolerances with the actual lens, but we're addressing tolerances with the camera and the part that I'm making at the moment. So they all have to work together. They all have to fit and work together. Now, tolerance is a really interesting thing, because as a designer, you have to design something that's going to fit one Helios, another Helios, and maybe a Helios that I've never come across before. So they have to all work regardless of who made the Helios lens, because 3 different manufacturers made these Helios lenses. I think there was KMZ, and there was Valdai, and there was another one. So they probably all had slightly small variations in that design. Probably a tolerance, or probably a different kind of screw, or anything's possible. And this is what I found with this lens. So I found that the focus throw was scuffing because it was closer to the bayonet, closer to the Pixelvalve adapter than it was on this one here. And I had to understand why that was. Now, it's possible that could be because of the tolerances of the multi-jet fusion technology that I'm using at the moment, which is a tolerance of about 0.4 millimeters, which is tiny. Each part can be off slightly, either too small or too big by 0.4 millimeters. So if you have 2 parts and they're both out a little bit by 0.4, say slightly larger by 0.4 millimeters, it means that combining them you're getting 0.8. So it becomes more serious. So if you have a part that needs to fit into another part and they're just very slightly oversized each one, it means that they're going to be very tight fitting, or they're going to be difficult to fit into each other. Now, these things can only be ironed out over time, and there's nothing worse than a customer receiving a product that's been designed and it doesn't quite fit, or it's hard to put into place, or it doesn't fit on their particular Helios. So the reason this is taking a long time at the moment is because these little things need ironing out. You see, they do work, and because it's such a small gap, like 0.4, it means that even though the part I've designed may not fit my Helios lens, with a little bit of sandpaper I can easily make it fit, but not everyone can do that. So before I can make this absolutely perfect and ready, I need to make sure that every little instance like that is covered. Now, I know what you're thinking. That could be infinity, couldn't it? That could take forever, because there's all kinds of different variations and there's all kinds of possibilities, and then perhaps there might be a change in the technology that prints them in the future. Possible. But my job as a designer would be to account for everything that I can account for, because the customers are protected by trading laws and things like that, so they can have refunds, but it's better to make something that's a good quality from the very beginning, I think. Because something that's good quality, something that works and works reliably, is less hassle when it comes to the end user. There's nothing worse than expecting something, and when you get it, you find that it's not quite right. So all of these things have to be ironed out properly. Now, I did say in the last video that this works great, this works brilliantly, and it did, and it does. But realistically, I need to tweak a little further. Now we've moved on from this old design. This old design, when I took it apart, I found that it was actually crumbled inside. So this is the original one. It was 3D printed on a resin printer. And you can see there that the inside had cracked. It was actually very liquid. There was a liquid on there. So some of the resin obviously hadn't dried inside the hardened outer casing. So this, even though it's tough, hard resin, I would say there are some serious issues with the resin printing. So it's not something that can be used for final production, which is another reason why we are doing it this way. Now, every time that I get a first off or a product prototype made, it costs a lot of money, because product design is very much the same as inventing something, where it costs a lot of money. Each time something is developed, each time something is processed and printed or produced, it costs money, and it's not returning any money at the moment. So these things are not producing any sales or anything like that. It's still in development, and that's something with product design that you have to be aware of, because whether you're designing something in your shed, whether you're designing something in your basement or your back room, it's always going to be the same. You're always going to come up to a point where you have to spend some money to actually test your idea, and sometimes you might be lucky and find a way of doing it cheaply, but often, especially when you get to the later stages of design, where things have to be very similar to the final product, if not the final product, then you're looking at some serious expense, especially if you're looking at injection molding, because there can be tens of thousands of pounds worth of tooling set up for things like injection molding. And if you're going to do that, you need to make absolute certain that these things fit and are exactly right. So it's not really more of an update today, it's more of a kind of exploration into product design. But there we go. I hope the video was useful. I hope it wasn't too disappointing. I know that you're expecting these things at some point, and I am working as fast as I can to produce them. Although, because they are they're not something that I'm being paid to do, they're not something that earns money, and I'm not working for a large company that pays me a wage to do this every week, development will be slow. It's just to be expected, and I'm sorry about that. Everyone who develops ideas will probably encounter the same problems. There's nothing that can be done, but I think with YouTube and things like that, we can explain it in a better way sometimes. Product design is a very difficult and expensive process. Anyway, thanks for watching, and if there's any more updates, or there will be, but when there is and if there is, I will let you see them. So thanks for watching, stay tuned for more. There'll be other content apart from lens design, because obviously I do a bit more than lens design. I'm not just a lens designer. I would say there are going to be several videos a little bit more interesting for those viewers that are probably more interested in making and doing. So stay tuned, and thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.